Hello everyone, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. I am the host of Reformed GGA, and I'm here to do an initial reaction video regarding this beauty right here. This is a CZ Scorpion Evo 3 Plus Carbine. And let's go ahead and start this by talking about some differences in how it appears now versus how it came out of the box. One of the biggest differences will be at the muzzle end. As far as I can tell, all of the 3 Plus carbines that are on the market right now come with a fake suppressor on them. Those of you who have watched my channel for a long time know that I am not a big fan of muzzle devices of pretty much any kind on 9mm PCCs, and that's because 9mm doesn't really produce a whole lot of gas, at least compared to, rifle caliber cartridges. And so any muzzle device that you would put on a PCC usually is just not going to do a whole lot. For example, you might think, well, at least a flash hider would be good, and to a certain extent you might be correct, but it's also a 16-inch long barrel, and most 9mm cartridges usually optimize somewhere between like 9 and 12 inches. So it's going to be past the point of optimization for a good number of 9mm cartridges that are out there, meaning that pretty much all of the powder is already going to be burned by the time that the bullet is exiting the barrel, so there's not going to be a whole lot of flash to hide. And on top of that, in addition to there not being a whole lot of flash to start with it being a PCC, this is not something that you're going to be using at great range, and so concealing your flash signature is not really as big of a deal. It can be in some certain situations, but a lot of times, when PCCs do get used, and they're relatively rare because people would either, prefer a rifle for rifle things or an actual handgun for pistol things, and so PCCs kind of get left in the middle and don't really see a whole lot of serious use because of that sometimes, at least depending on particular context. But even at that, it's still a cartridge with limited range. The vast majority of the time, if it is going to get used, it's usually used at more or less CQB distances. And if you actually are firing, most of the time people are going to know where you are because you're close enough to see, and there's a really loud sound coming from you as you're firing a gun. Concealments in that kind of a situation, you're not really going to be hiding from anyone. Aside from, ducking for cover, that kind of thing. But in terms of, hiding your flash signature, as you fight in your living room, is not really all that useful of a thing. And then as far as like brakes are concerned, again, 9mm doesn't produce a whole lot of gas, so brakes are not going to be very brakey. Compensators are not going to really compensate all that much. I just personally don't find putting much in the way of muzzle devices on 9mm PCCs to be particularly useful. Some people really like them, and they go into great lengths to get the exact compensator or brake or whatever that they want to have on their PCC. But like I said, in general, for me, it's not a big deal. I do like having muzzle devices on my other guns. I have a 308 that has a pretty healthy brake on it, and I'm glad that it has a fairly healthy brake on it, because otherwise that gun would definitely kick more than it does, and that's a real appreciable difference with 308. 308 produces quite a bit of gas, and using that gas to take the edge off of the recoil is not a bad thing at all. I'm very much so for muzzle devices where it makes sense. I'm just not convinced that muzzle devices on 9mm PCCs really makes a whole lot of sense. And especially CZ deciding that on pretty much all of the 3 Plus Scorpions that are out there right now, whether they be the micro size, the standard pistol size, or the carbine size, they seem to be convinced that putting fake suppressors on all of them is the way to go. To me, this is even worse than when companies put on brakes and compensators and things like that on PCCs, because this thing doesn't do anything. It literally just goes around the barrel, sits there, and makes it look like you have something on the gun that you don't. Now, fortunately, it is labeled. Let's see if I can hold it steady enough for you guys. Oops, wrong way. There we go. Yeah, it is actually called a faux suppressor on the labeling. It is described on the product itself as being inert. And by the way, for those of you guys who want to take this off, I just took this one off with a strap wrench. It's not too difficult. It is actually two pieces. The little part with the grooves in it actually unscrews from the smooth part. So when you're undoing it from the gun, make sure that your strap wrench is on the part with the grooves, because otherwise you'll just take the pieces apart and that doesn't actually get it off the gun. But yeah, that's just a weird kind of cringy thing that CZ has done with their Scorpions. You know, they all have to have suppressors on them. Even though they're fake suppressors and they don't do anything, and the vast majority of the American market is not going to want to put a suppressor on the thing in the first place. It's only like 1% of gun buyers in the US actually use silencers. It's not really that big of a thing, so having an entire product line that pushes suppressors, that tries to capitalize on any cool factor that suppressors would have, it's really a cringy thing to do. It's like when, was it CZ or was it a third-party company? I can't remember which. But a while ago, somebody, I think it was actually CZ, but somebody came out with a bayonet for the CZ75. And putting bayonets on guns isn't all that odd. And yes, there are people in the American market that would definitely buy a bayonet for guns, especially like military collectors and those kinds of things, because lots of military guns have had bayonets. Or people that at least own, a quote-unquote military-style rifle and just simply want to be able to put a bayonet on it. People happen to buy an AK, it has, AK lugs, so might as well get an AK bayonet, just kind of complete the thing. That does make sense in the American market. The problem with making a bayonet for the CZ75, though, is that the CZ75 is a handgun. It's never been a real military thing to put bayonets on handguns. In fact, in modern times, most militaries don't even bother putting bayonets on rifles anymore. So deciding to make a bayonet for the handgun was a really weird thing to do. It was definitely going for a demographic of the population that is very cringeworthy. It's, kind of the mall ninja type stuff. This looks cool, come buy this now. Is this what anyone would actually use in real life? I really hope not. If you have a gun, I hope that your first instinct, especially if you have a handgun, I really hope that your first instinct is not to try to deploy the blade that is attached to your handgun. I guess no matter how you come to that fight, I guess you're covered, right? You got the gun and the knife. Yeah, that's just weird and bizarre. And having a fake suppressor on a product that most people are not going to actually suppress doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. It's just cringy. That's all that it is. So no, I did not keep the fake suppressor on it. Put a strap wrench on there, got it yanked off, replaced it with a simple barrel nut, and no, I'm not interested in putting on any brakes or flash hiders or anything like that. If you guys decide you want to get the gun and put your favorite muzzle device on there, you go right ahead and you do you, as the saying goes. But realistically, most of the muzzle devices you would put on a 9mm PCC are not really going to be all that helpful. I do like that they have it threaded, though, just in case, for those people that do, and for those few people that are actually going to get a real suppressor and put it on the end of the gun. They actually have something to attach to. I mean, that's not a bad thing to have a threaded muzzle. I like that, but realistically, there's not usually a whole lot to put on there that really makes a whole lot of sense. So that was the first major change regarding how it came out of the box. The second major change has to do with the optic. Now, you will notice that the standard stock that comes on these, and this has been the style of stock that has been on the CZ Scorpions for a very long time now. These are a pretty well-known quantity at this point. But you'll notice that the stock drops a little bit, and so that when you get a good cheek weld on there, you're actually sitting pretty low relative to the rail. And so optics that you put on this gun would naturally be such that you would want them fairly low. Your cheek weld is low, and therefore your mount for your optic needs to be low. correspondingly. For whatever crazy reason, CZ decided that they were going to change the sights, the open sights that they put on the CZ Scorpion, and make them a little bit taller than they used to. So these are the new open sights that they have on the CZ Scorpion. They're a little bit heavy, but they're also very high quality, I would say. There is the front post. It's very much so like an AR-15 front post, you know, twist it up and down for elevation. And then the rear is just a little peep sight, and it actually has a few different size apertures, so you can get the one you want. It's from fairly large to very small. And there is a rotary knob on the side so that you can adjust the windage. This is in operation. It's basically the same as the old open sights that they used to use, except the older open sights sat lower relative to the rail. But these ones, they don't sit low anymore. That is about the height that they sit at. And as you can see, that interrupts the optic. So if I want to have a low mount optic on this gun, I can't actually use these sights because these sights get in the way of the optic. Now, CZ actually put that forward as being a major advertising point, that they had new raised open sights that would give you a 1/3 co-witness. And they do if your optic is sitting on an AR type riser. But you don't use an AR type riser on guns that have drop stocks. You see the problem here? This has been a tendency with a lot of companies, especially a lot of import companies, where they have basically been trying to make their stuff accept AR aftermarket products. So AR height red darts, AR, excuse me, for those of you guys who don't know, I have some digestive issues, so I burp at weird times. So if that comes across on camera, I apologize. Can't really do a lot about it. Moving on. But a lot of companies have taken to trying to modify their guns so that they take AR parts, whether it be AR triggers or AR pistol grips, AR stocks, and AR height sights. A lot of them have been doing that, and it messes with the guns. This gun was not designed to take AR height sights originally, and if you use it as it was originally configured with the drop stock, it doesn't need an extra riser in there. What you're going to wind up with is a chin weld instead of a proper cheek weld. And I mean, yeah, that's the heads up thing, and it's more tactical and all that kind of thing, but realistically it's not needed. You have a drop stock, use a low mount optic, and give us open sights that will actually work with the proper mounting height for the gun. So that is another change that I made. I wound up taking off the open sights because they don't work with the red dot. So that was a change. And then the other change that I made was the inclusion of 2 aftermarket charging handles. This is something that I found to be very confusing about the design, actually, in that pretty much all of the other controls on this particular version of the CZ Scorpion are all ambidextrous. You have, you know, a safety on one side that is mirrored exactly on the other. You can also see the mag release on one side, and of course that mag release is mirrored on the other side. And these little paddles down here were kind of tabs that you press on. Those are for the bolt release, bolt stop, and of course there's one on one side, and it is perfectly mirrored over on the other side right here. So pretty much all of the other controls, of course the trigger is naturally going to be ambidextrous, but all the other controls are also ambidextrous. You have ambidextrous mag releases, you have ambidextrous bolt stop, bolt catch. Of course, I already mentioned the trigger, safety is ambidextrous, all that good wonderful stuff. Out of the box though, it didn't come with 2 charging handles. And obviously the gun accepts them. I just got a couple from HB Industries, from HBI, and this is one of their simpler models. It's a little bit more extended than the factory one, and I just got 2 of them and put them on both sides of the gun, so now it is truly completely ambidextrous. Before they just had one that you could swap from one side to the other, but being able to swap it isn't the same thing as being truly ambidextrous. Truly ambidextrous means that you don't have to modify the gun at all when you hand it off to somebody else who is other-handed than you. So if I can't hand it, in my case, I'm right-handed, if I can't hand it off to a left-handed person immediately without having to make any adjustments, it's not truly an ambidextrous gun. CZ made this thing extremely close to being truly ambidextrous as far as its controls are concerned. There is some weirdness with the sling mount that I'll need to talk about, but right now I'm focusing on the actual controls themselves. And like I said, we got every other major control out there to be ambidextrous. Why not make the charging hand put in 2 functioning charging handles? I have no idea why. That didn't make any sense to me, so I went ahead and did it myself, and I am very pleased with the results. They're relatively simple to install, not quite as easy on some guns. I wouldn't call it a field expedient change, but as long as you have some basic tools, basically just a set of punches, and maybe just a little bit of patience and a little bit of gun oil to lube things up when you get them changed out and whatnot, that's basically all that you need. There is a little plastic rod that retains the charging handles. So all that you would do is take the existing charging handle that is on there, lock it in place. You'll knock the little plastic pin out with a punch. Don't hit it too hard, it's just plastic. Knock that out. Make sure that you check the orientation, because it has a little tab on the inside that needs to face towards the breech of the barrel, back towards the gun. Make sure that you note that, what the orientation is, and then you can actually slide the charging handle out, the old one out. As you do, there'll be a point near that hole that will be left by that little plastic insert where it'll kind of catch. Don't force it past that point. Take your punch and press on it just a little bit, because there's actually a little detent on the rod itself that you have to push in. Push in that little detent with your punch, pull it the rest of the way out, replace, put on the other side, whatever you need to do, and then of course lock them back before you go to put in the little plastic piece again. And that's pretty much it. It's a little bit more involved than with some guns. Some guns, it's basically you field strip it, there'll be a takedown point, and then you switch it over to the other side. But on the CZ Scorpion, like I said, it's a little bit more involved. You have to punch out that little plastic piece that retains it, and remember to lock it back to start with, and those kinds of things. And also when you're putting it back in, it's good to have it locked back as well. But yeah, it's not all that hard to do, and once you have them in, I mean, it's perfectly functional on either side. Yes, these ones do stick out a little bit because these ones are made to stick out a little bit. They're made to be easy charging. But yeah, go ahead and drop the bolt here, just using that nice little bolt release that they now come with. Very simple, very easy, works just fine. Why they didn't do that from the factory, I don't know. But yeah, those are the major changes that I made to the gun regarding how it came out of the box. Took off the stupid faux suppressor. I actually really like the open sights. They're nice open sights, but they got in the way of a properly mounted red dot in terms of where your cheek weld actually should be. At least conventionally speaking. I know there is the doctrine right now for the heads up for CQB guns, and if that's the way you want to go, at the end of the day, that's up to you. But it's a drop stock. There really is no reason why it has to be raised in terms of basic functionality. Alright, so that is how it came out of the box. Oh, one more thing that I wanted to mention about what comes out of the box. They give you a little cleaning kit, and mine, I think, might be missing something. It does come with an assortment of odds and ends and all kinds of wonderful little things. You know, got cleaning brushes in there, cleaning jag, all that good kind of stuff. Yeah, all that is well and good. Little bit of oil in the pouch there. And they also give you a cleaning cable that basically works like a bore snake. It does. That's essentially what it is. But for the life of me, I cannot find the handle for the cleaning cable. So you would stick it through the barrel, and then you need to pull it through the barrel. You put your jag or your brush or whatever on the other end, and you pull it through. But when you pull a cable through, there's a little bit more resistance than on like the rope ones. Sometimes it's not quite all that easy to pull through, so you really need a handle, or at least it's nice to have a handle, and I have not been able to find a handle in the kit at all. So it's a decent enough kit, but the main component, the component that clears out the barrel, doesn't seem like it would really work all that properly. But maybe I'm just missing something, or maybe you're just supposed to brute strength it through or whatever. I don't know, but to me it seems like it's missing a handle, but that might just be me. Alright, and then, as already mentioned, in terms of features, it has basically changed from the old CZ Scorpion in terms of some of its ergonomics. That's the whole reason why the 3 Plus was invented in the first place, is so that you could have magazines that basically dropped like AR magazines. So now it's a push button on the side that makes it work basically just like AR magazines do. And the little bolt release tabs that they have now function very much so like the the CZ Bren 2 does. And so far I actually like them. It's a little bit different, because if you're used to ARs and those kinds of things, you're used to, you know, the bolt release being kind of a little teeter-totter lever on the opposite side of the gun for right-handers. It would be on the, well, left or right-handed, it would be on the left side. Used to that being, but using your index finger to drop the bolts or to raise or to lock the bolts isn't a big thing. So push down to release, push up with my index finger to lock it back. Works just fine. And of course, the Scorpions have the locking notch, which is always nice to have, in my opinion. Some people don't like the locking notches because they think that it makes things potentially complicated, and you might have done one thing where you thought you did it another way. Did I hold open the bolts by using the locking notch, or did I hold open the bolts by using the bolt catch to do so? To me, it's not that big of a deal. It's mostly a training issue. But in terms of design, that locking notch actually is necessary, because that's how you disassemble the gun. You have to have the locking notches in order to do that properly. So I don't think they're going to be changing that part of the design anytime soon. But they did make some ergonomic changes that are actually fairly nice, to be honest. The downside of those ergonomic changes, of being able to do AR-type magazine reloads and that kind of thing, or CZ Bren 2 magazine reloads, the downside of that is that they, of course, had to change the magazine design. The magazines now have this little rectangle cut in them, and that is what interacts with the new magazine releases. So that means any CZ Scorpion magazines that you have from older versions of the CZ Scorpion, they will not work in the new gun unless you can get the proper cutout in them. And I think there are some third-party companies out there that are going to make a little jig that you can put the magazines in so that you can cut out the appropriate amount of material. But I always worry about those just because sometimes those aftermarket jigs aren't all that great. Sometimes the loose nut behind the jig, namely myself, isn't all that steady, and sometimes you'll wind up with a system that frankly doesn't work very well. And then you'll also have some dimension issues. These are the new CZ Scorpion magazines, and the factory makes them, I think, in 3 different sizes: 10 rounds, 20 rounds, and 30 rounds. Out of the box, they come with 2 of the 20 rounders, these little guys right here. And for those of you who are concerned, that is just a dummy round that is completely inert. The gun, of course, was checked and cleared off camera, as were all of the magazines. I just like to have a dummy round on hand whenever I'm working with anything that's pistol caliber, because most pistol caliber guns have a spring-loaded firing pin, and spring-loaded firing pins, if you dry fire them repeatedly, can oftentimes develop what is called work hardening, at which point they can actually break and snap. And of course I don't want the firing pin to break or snap, so I like to use dummy rounds whenever I work on that. But I did find that there is actually kind of a nice feature of the new guns, and that they actually seem to accept the lowers from the old guns. So I still have a CZ Scorpion pistol laying around, but of course pistols are not as useful these days in a good many respects as they used to be because of certain things going on with the ATF. But I did find that the old trigger pack, the old lower from the pistol, which is what this one was tan obviously, and it has the old controls, so there's the old bolt stop, bolt release, and the magazine release was a paddle type release. But I found that this actually fits perfectly. Whoops, need to make sure that the pin is out, but I found that this works perfectly. In the new gun, so I can use my old magazines. This is one of the PSA magazines, but I can use the old magazines and it will still lock back the bolts and everything. I can use the old style bolt release just fine, and you'll notice that the way that I'm holding it right now would actually be a left-hander, and yes, a left-hander can operate the bolt release on the old CZs just fine. That was originally ambidextrous, and it's still ambidextrous, so if I'm a left-hander, I just pull down on the bolt release. If I am a right-hander, when I am replacing the magazine, I just do it with my thumb out, grab it, and pull down, and that works as well. But like I said, the upper accepts the old lower, so as long as you actually have one of the old Scorpions, like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a particularly useful form, but as long as you just have the lower, you will be able to use your old magazines. So me, I didn't go out and get a ton of these new magazines. I literally got a couple that it didn't come with. It came with 2 of the 20 rounders. I bought a couple of the bigger ones, and then all the other magazines that I plan on running through it, at least for the time being, are going to be all of the old ones in the old lower here. So yeah, it's not quite as ergonomic, but in terms of being able to run your old magazines, it works just fine. Just take the lower from your old gun and put it on the new one, and you're good to go that way if you want to be able to use the old magazines. Alright, and of course, takedown disassembly is the same that it's basically always been on the CZ Scorpion Evo 3. Take one of the charging handles. If it's factory, it'll only come with one charging handle. Lock it into its locking notch. There will be a pin on the lower that you just push out, and then the lower basically tips out of the gun. Go ahead and put that off. And then you're going to reach inside, push down on the bolts, and tip it out slowly and very carefully. It's a fairly strong spring, so you want to be careful that you don't, slam get your fingers caught in there. But as long as you're keeping pressure on it, it's not too bad. It just tips out, and that's it. This is all the field stripping that you need to do. Like I said, lock the charging handle back, pin, tip, push, and tip, and that's it. So you have the upper, you have the bolts, and of course the lower, and that's all the pieces and parts that you need for regular disassembly and cleaning. To put it back together is basically the same order. I should say is the reverse order. Do make sure that your charging handle is in the locking notch before you reassemble. So make sure that that is locked. Tip your bolts in. You'll see that it doesn't want to fit, so you actually have to compress it to get it to fit, and keep pushing down and in until you get it to lock on the charging handle. And it's important that you maintain good pressure so that you don't get it caught in there like I almost did. And then that should rest by itself once you get it back under the charging handle. And then we're going to tip in the lower. Oops. Make sure that the pin is in the open position. Make sure the pin is out. Tip it back in. Put the pin back through. Release the charging handle. You're back together. Very easy to disassemble. A little bit tricky because of the whole spring thing with the bolts, but you get used to that. And having something that disassembles into 3 basic pieces is so nice compared to so many other PCCs and just other guns in general. Alright, so let's see here. We've talked about magazine compatibility. We've talked about a lot of the basic features. Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention that I said I was going to mention was the sling mount. On the gun itself, this is technically on the adapter on the end, but basically immediate to the receiver, there is 1 QD socket on the left-hand side of the gun, so that would work decently well for right-handers. But there is no equivalent on the other side, and the forward sling mounts that used to be on the CZ Scorpions has been removed. Now, on the stock itself, on the very butt, there is a couple of QD mounts, and they are mirrored on either side, but most people don't really like to mount their slings on the stock itself, especially in this case because it's a folding stock, and so if you fold it, obviously that is going to mess with the sling position more than a little bit. So yeah, that's a little bit weird and annoying. By the way, this stock does lock in place. There's just a little tension piece at the back. See this little, let's see if I can get the light on. All right, there's a little plastic hook there, and it actually just hooks to the bottom of the mag well. But that only works if the butt is in its fully closed position as far as the telescoping part. If you have it open all the way, or just part of the way, that catch is too far forward, completely misses the mag well, and then it's just floppy. So if you want it to actually fold and stay folded, you need to make sure that the telescoping part of the stock is fully in, and then it's just a matter of applying a little bit of downward pressure so that you can get under the mag well, and then it retains just fine after that. And another thing that is a little sad about it is that it is one-sided. You'll notice this kind of jagged cut on the butt of the stock, and that is so that it can meet up with the lines of the gun. Makes sense, but what it does mean is that the stock is very much so one-sided. It only folds to the right. There's no provision, no hook on the other side. It's just on the right-hand side of the stock. So that's kind of the side that you're stuck with it being on. You can't reverse the stock or anything like that. And like I said, in terms of useful sling mounts, there's only one, and it is very obviously for a right-handed person. So that one's also a little bit of a fail. In terms of reliability, of course, I haven't shot it, so I don't know. But if it's anything like the other CZ Scorpions that I've dealt with, it's probably going to be just fine. For all of the weirdness that the CZ Scorpions have had, because they've always been a little bit odd ergonomically, but for all the weirdness, they have had a fantastic reputation in terms of reliability. They usually will fire just about any kind of factory ammunition that is out there, especially the common plinking stuff. They're usually just fine with that. in my own experience and what I've seen online, basically everything from a standard 50 grain load, not 150, 50 grain load, all the way up to like 158 grain. Some Sodics, I think I've even seen some people do like 168 grain. Maybe not quite that high, but at least 158 grain. And it's fire basically everything in between. And it's usually pretty good with defensive rounds as well, as long as they don't get too crazy with the design. For example, I think some people have had problems with the RIP ammunition because it's got a kind of weird jagged end on it, and it doesn't feed very well through like anything. But particularly in a system like this, it doesn't feed very well either. So bear that in mind, but most things it will feed just fine. As I discovered with earlier versions of the CZ Scorpion, I will go ahead and reinforce the points that they have been known to fire out of battery. And a lot of that has to do with people who are running the guns very fast, you know, like bump firing and those kinds of things. And they can fire out of battery technically a little bit on lots of kinds of ammunition. It's usually not a super big deal. I definitely wouldn't run aluminum ammunition in there. And also I'd be very wary of the Winchester stuff, especially the Winchester NATO ammunition, because it's actually got a little pocket in the back of the projectile that if the bullet isn't fully seated in the chamber and it goes off, usually the casing is strong enough to absorb it not actually being fully seated. The casing is strong enough to deal with that. Just like on a lot of the old Glocks were not fully supported, and so it would kind of bulge the casing a little bit, but it didn't result in any catastrophic failures the vast majority of the time. CZ Scorpions are a little bit like that too. And it becomes a problem with that Winchester ammunition because, like I said, the back of the Winchester projectiles is actually concave, and so if it detonates a little too far back in the chamber, that edge of the concavity will actually be pushed out into the chamber instead of into the barrel, and it'll actually get stuck in the chamber, just the edge of the concavity. The main projectile still goes down the barrel and all that, but you'll have a little copper ring that will form inside the chamber, and of course that copper ring, as it grows, will prevent subsequent bullets from being fully seated until eventually you either do get a true out of battery detonation, or it just simply stops up the gun because it can't close enough for the firing pin to actually get a proper strike on the primer. Can't talk right now, sorry. So that is a potential weakness of the design, and in looking over the components of this new 3 Plus version, I'm not seeing that they've changed that, so I would continue to warn people against aluminum case ammunition or any kind of ammunition that has a particularly weak casing, and also against the Winchester ammunition, especially the Winchester 124 grain NATO ammunition, because I have personal experience with that particular ammunition, and I know that it has that concavity, and I've actually had problems with that particular ammo and producing the result that I just talked about, leaving that little ring of copper inside of the chamber rather than the actual bore. So those are potential issues with CZ Scorpions, but aside from those kinds of things, they have an excellent reputation for being very, very reliable, and that has been my experience with them by and large. Like I said, stay away from the aluminum case stuff, stay away from the Winchester ammunition, and also understand that they're probably not the best guns to bump fire. That's probably not going to keep some people from doing it, but they're not the best guns to bump fire because technically they can fire out of battery. With most decent ammunition, that's not a huge problem, but just bear that in mind. Outside of that range, I've known them to be extremely reliable and work with just about every kind of ammo that I've ever put through it. Haven't fired this one yet, but my other CZ Scorpions, they didn't mind if it was Blazer, they didn't mind if it was Tula, they didn't mind if it was Federal, they really didn't care. Pretty much anything that I could find that was a factory ammunition that had a semi-normal shape to it would usually feed and function perfectly okay. Not a big deal. These guns are not known for being picky. I don't expect this one to be any different, but of course I need to go out and actually shoot it, and we'll see if there are any differences, but I'm not really anticipating that to be an issue. All right, anything else that needs to be noted? Yes, there are a few things that I didn't mention. One is that they changed the pistol grip a little bit. I actually didn't mind the last one, but a lot of people did, and so they made it a little bit more vertical, a little bit more perpendicular to the natural line of the barrel. And that reorients the hand just a little bit relative to the safety. The safety looks exactly the same as it was before. But the problem that a lot of people had is that the offside safety would dig into their trigger finger a little bit, but with the reorientation of the grip, that is not as big of an issue, and frankly for me it never really was an issue, but there is that. Also, the trigger looks like it is exactly the same, and it is also just as heavy as it was before. The stock trigger comes in at around 9 pounds, and frankly I don't think that CZ has any major plans to change that, and personally I don't mind it, but there are people out there that are trigger snobs, and there are plenty of aftermarket options for them. I don't know if all of them will work in the 3 Plus, but if they don't, I'm very sure that a lot of those companies will make adjustments in the not too distant future so that it can work in the 3 Plus. They have everything from HBI, which basically offers basically just a little spring replacement. It's like $10 plus shipping and handling, but it's like $10, and it basically cuts the trigger weight by almost half. And then Timney came out with a trigger pack for the old lower that basically replaced the entire pack, and I think that was like a 3-pound trigger or something like that. If it doesn't already work in this lower, I'm sure that they'll make an adjustment for that, but personally I don't really plan on changing it because I don't mind the trigger. But like I said, there are some people that it will definitely bug them, and I'm sure that if they're not out on the market yet, that there will be other options for replacing that trigger in the not too distant future. All right, anything else? I think that pretty well covers all the basic features. I've covered what it came with it in the box. Oh, I did want to talk about the length of pull just a little bit because it is somewhat restrictive. There's only 3 positions on the telescoping stock, and so your length of pull options are also somewhat limited. Fully forward, you have a length of pull of about 12.5 inches. The middle position is 13.5 inches, and then the fully extended position is 14.5 inches. So that will cover pretty much everyone who is around 5'4" to 6'2" in height, so 5 foot 4 inches up to 6 foot 2 inches, pretty well. The further that you go outside of that ballpark, the less well that it's going to work. So there are some smaller women and children, and perhaps a few of the smaller guys, that will find even the Klaus version of the stock to be just a little too long. And of course, if you're a very tall person, you know, an NBA player or something like that, 14.5 inches is not going to be quite long enough for some of you. So it gets a lot of the population, but the edges are still going to be a little finicky. So just bear that in mind if you're getting a gun like this to be used by multiple people. And then last but not least, we'll go ahead and we'll talk about the philosophy of use of something like this. And with it having the long barrel like this, it's pretty clear that the philosophy of use is centered around certain legalities. That's the only reason why manufacturers of this kind of a gun, something that's pistol caliber, would ever put on a barrel that is this long. They're just trying to meet legal requirements. So what you're trying to do is meet legal requirements in a platform that is easier to use than a standard handgun. You put it in something that you can actually shoulder, and you're going to be substantially quicker and oftentimes more accurate. But the range is not going to be huge because it's still just a pistol caliber, so there are going to be some limitations. Now, this particular optic that I have on here is a Holosun 503G with an ACS reticle, so it does have some holdover marks even for 9mm that are good out to 200 yards, but that's 200 yards on a full-size silhouette. That's definitely not precision shooting by any stretch of the imagination. Functionally, most people are going to feel a lot more comfortable with these things like 25 yards and in. And you'd say, well, that overlaps with handguns, what most people would expect to use handguns at. And you're right. But most people really suck at using handguns. And so if you want something that is easy and fast to shoot at relatively close ranges without a whole lot of worry, that's where something like this comes in. It's, yes, definitely bigger than it needs to be because of legal issues, but it uses the same ammunition that you would have in that handgun, but you have it in a form that's easier to use. So if you want to work with, fairly close targets on which, rifle rounds would be a little overkill, want something that's maybe cheaper than a lot of your rifle rounds, because this is 9mm, and 9mm is still kind of sort of, inexpensive compared at least to true rifle rounds. That's basically what I would consider the philosophy of use to be. You want something that's relatively cheap to shoot, relatively easy to shoot, relatively quick compared to a handgun, but you don't want the ongoing expenses of rifle. You don't want to have to, pay for rifle ammunition, and you also don't want to be as concerned with distances and ricochets and those kinds of things as you would have to be with a rifle. For example, if you shoot steel targets, depending on the particular steel targets and the particular ammunition that you're using and the caliber of the gun, so on and so forth, sometimes it's not really safe to shoot at steel targets up close with rifles. In fact, a lot of times it is not. It's a good way to catch a bit of ricochet, But pistol ammunition, on the other hand, doesn't have nearly as much energy, and so it usually is a lot safer to shoot at up close, at least if you're using conventional, copper jacket lead core type bullets, and even a lot of the steel case ammunition, which isn't quite made like that, but it's similar enough that it usually works out just fine. If you're using that kind of ammunition in pistol rounds, you can usually get pretty close to steel targets with pistol rounds and be just fine. And this would allow you to do that, but without a lot of the time and the hassle associated with pistol rounds. So that's basically the purpose of use. Just something that uses the pistol round, but allows you to get closer to the targets, especially steel targets, than would be really comfortable with a rifle. Now, yes, for rifles, they do have frangible ammo that takes care of that particular issue, but that frangible ammo is not cheap. A 9mm round is still cheaper than frangible, 5.56 ammo, for example. So it would still be cheaper to go with this kind of a setup. Another purpose of use that you might have for this, philosophy of use that you might have for this, is basically a home defense weapon that multiple people in the family could operate. A lot of times, women and children, I don't mean to paint with too broad of a brush, but I've seen this multiple times. We'll just say that a decent number of women and children are not going to be very comfortable with a full-size rifle. They just don't gravitate toward those things. They're too big, too loud, too heavy, etc., etc. And so having a home defense weapon that everybody can use with relatively little skill and something that is not particularly threatening to them can be a great advantage. I've actually documented a couple of cases in which men left their wives or daughters or whoever the case happened to be, left somebody else home alone with their loaded AR-15 sitting in one room and said, if anything happens, go grab the AR-15, etc., etc. And something did happen, and the person that was supposed to grab the AR-15, instead of grabbing it, basically went and hid in the bathroom and waited for things to pass by. But they didn't gravitate towards the rifle. And that's because their experience with the rifle was that it was really, really, really freaking loud. Usually, the man will drag his family off to the range with them at least once and say, okay, here's how you use this. And they shoot it a few times, and it's heavy by comparison, although an AR-15 really isn't all that heavy, but heavy by comparison, and really loud because 5.56 is a very high pressure cartridge, and they don't gravitate towards it, and they don't get easy hits with it. And like I said, if you're trying to work with steel targets and whatnot, you might set them a little bit further out, and that means you're kind of going to have to be bench resting it in order to get hits at further distances. It's just not something that comes very naturally to them. But for a lot of people, my experience has been that I can give them a pistol caliber carbine like this, have them shoot at relatively close targets, standing, something that's going to be fairly intuitive and natural to them, and it's fairly light. I mean, it is bigger than, would be mechanically necessary, but it's still fairly light. This one, even when fully kitted out with a, loaded 30-round magazine in it, it's a weapon light on it, optic as you see here, even fully kitted out, this gun still only weighs about 7 3/4 pounds, whereas most rifle caliber guns are still going to be heavier than that, and they're definitely going to have a different balance point. This one, of course, doesn't have a gas system, so there's basically nothing up front that really adds a whole lot of weight aside from the barrel, which you can see is a fairly thin profile for a 9mm, and the handguard, which is just a polymer handguard, so there's not much weight there either. Most of it is kind of in the back end of the gun, and so it actually balances quite nice, and you don't have the fatigue issue that you sometimes will get with other rifles. All that to say that when I take women out to shoot, when I take younger people out to shoot, male or female, even some of the smaller guys out to shoot, putting this in their hands and telling them to shoot at targets that are 25 yards and in comes very naturally to them. It's not as loud as the ARs, it's not as heavy as the ARs. And like I said, ARs actually aren't all that heavy, and you can make an AR really light if you want to. It's just not going to be very cheap if you do that, because the special lightweight parts are sometimes a little bit more expensive. And depends on how you have it configured. I have found that most of the people that I take shooting when it's their very first time, they really like the red dots. They don't like the open sights because there's too many things to remember, but put the red dot in the center of the target, they understand that. So something like this is what a lot of inexperienced people tend to gravitate towards. That's within my experience. And so as a training tool, it works great. And also, like I said, as a family defense weapon, a home defense weapon that you have, any, discrete location ready for anyone to use in the family who knows about it and would be competent to use it, can be a very handy thing. A lot of times guys forget that they're not the only one in the family who might be responsible for the family's protection. And getting something that everyone can run is a really big advantage. And there's a couple of families I know that have, people in the family that are left-handed. And so having something that is truly fully ambidextrous really can help in that regard. So like I said, it works as a plinking gun, it can work as kind of a family defense weapon, it's useful for training up close with steel targets. You don't have to buy special frangible ammunition, those kinds of things. PCCs in general get kind of a bad rap because it's rifle size, but it's only pistol power. But there are some, not terribly many, but there are some uses where that actually is basically exactly what you want. Alright, I've rambled on enough, which is my thing. By the way, there are people out there who don't understand that about this channel, that this channel is basically just me rambling about guns. Not sure what to tell you. That's kind of what it is, and that's why the videos are long. Alright, I'm done. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you would come to know the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior and Master of Masters. Amen.